I wake up filled with strong emotion, anxiety, uncertainty, and excitement. I gather my things, hoping that I'll have all that I will need. Dad and I get onto our bikes, weighed down like a camel in the Sahara, and embark on an unforgettable experience. I chose my Class 12 project because I wanted to do something familiar but new. I was inspired by what my dad had done in this space. I had seen it and knew I wanted to experience this way of spending time out in nature, as well as the training and execution of the adventure for myself. I spent a lot of time growing up in nature, and my parents' passion for it inspired me to ask questions about it, and I discovered a great deal. In this talk, I want to share with you what I found to be the actual power of nature on humankind. As I begin my project in March, I have to keep my momentum. So I begin my training with an aim of riding 90 kilometers a week, every week. I use Strava, an app that can track your rides and share them with other people. I would track my beats per minute, which is my heart rate, and stay within a certain range that would be sustainable for the long days of riding I was training for. I would ride 3 times a week and go from Mount Barker out towards Mackie on a loop. When I started doing my training rides, they would take about an hour and 40 minutes. I slowly progressed in speed and distance. I was doing the 30 kilometers in more like an hour and 30 or an hour and 20 minutes. I felt my improvements, and it was amazing. I was seeing these results, and it all felt like I could achieve anything. Then it came to winter. I did the one thing that I was told not to do by my mentor, Aaron. I started making excuses. It's raining. I'll do it tomorrow. This was bad. I had broken my rhythm and started to allow myself to be lazy. I was only riding once or twice a week. I was missing all of my goals. I had to break this pattern because I felt my drive for my project slip. At this point, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to do the ride if I kept this up. So, I started to be more consistent than I had been. I was on a roll. Throughout this first period of my training, I had been on my dad's gravel bike. At the same time, I had been fixing up an old Norco cross-country bike for touring with my other mentor, Christian. We completely stripped the bike apart, down to the bare frame, cleaned or replaced all the moving parts, and then rebuilt it. Putting the bike back together was very satisfying, and I think that's where I learnt the most about how the bike works. When we had to replace parts, it was very easy because 90% of them could be found somewhere in Christian's bike shed. And he was very generous. We had found what parts would need replacing for the bike to be in good enough condition. I was so excited to go on my first ride on the bike that I would use on the tour. By the time I had gone through this process to get it finished, I hadn't ridden in almost a month. I got back on the bike and did a ride. I felt slow the whole time, and when I got back, I was shocked. It had almost taken me 2 hours to do a ride that I could have done in an hour and a half before. I was overcome with anxiety, as I didn't know if it was the bike or since I hadn't ridden in almost a month, I had lost all my training fitness and more. This completely unmotivated me. I felt like I was back at square one. It felt like if you made up a big batch of pancakes and dropped them on the floor on the way to the table, but more severe. For the month to come, I felt down the whole time as I had the big ride looming over me in the future, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. I was barely riding once a week, and even though I was getting faster times on the bike compared to when I first got on it, they were nowhere near where I was before. I didn't know where I was going to go next. During this time, I was even wondering whether doing the ride itself was a viable option, or whether I would have to find another way to research my question through gravel riding. This was the hardest time of my project. The goal I had been working towards all year seemed almost impossible, but with my parents' encouragement, I decided I would set my mind to this, and I had to keep pushing through to complete it. I found myself feeling much more happy during the time that I was training consistently. I loved the moments I had out on my rides when I could just take a breath out while I was stressed. When I would look off into nature, I wouldn't find my mind occupied with the same things that it would be when looking at anything else. It's like looking at a blank page where you can draw whatever you want with your imagination. You can think so broadly without anything being already imposed on your mind. You just observe and see where your mind will take you. The special space that I experienced this the most before my training was on the land we have on Kangaroo Island. Sitting on the dark toned wooden deck, looking over the treetops of the mallee as they slowly form into small shrubbery into the ocean. The research question that I have chose to explore through my project was regarding how being physically active in nature is good for your mental health. Research tells us that it is good for your mental health and improves motivation, but I needed to test it for myself. I experienced this during my training a few times, but the most prominent to me was on my third ride, when I got to the top of a climb and stopped. I looked out and I could see the whole way from near Macclesfield to the lakes. This took my breath away. I wish I could live that feeling constantly. I wanted to help other people to make it possible for them to have an experience like this. So I spent time volunteering at a place called Bikes for Refugees. They sell about 50% of their bikes and give away the other 50% to people in need. People also come in and donate bikes, some that hardly work and some that are in perfect order. I volunteered with them over 5 days in the school holidays. The timing of this was perfect because I had just gained so much more knowledge on how to fix and service bikes from my time with Christian. Over the time there, I was able to fix up several BMX bikes that were sent to the Unganul Pitjantjatjara Yanganjara APY lands. I worked on old bikes and pulled off all the useful parts, then sorted bikes they had on site to find ones that could be easily fixed to someone to buy or to be donated. I really enjoyed my time there as it felt rewarding being able to help people who were less fortunate and couldn't get on the bike like I could. At the end of my time there, Mike, the owner of Bikes for Refugees, said I could take any bike parts I needed since they have such an abundance of them. I was keen for new forks. I had narrowed the issue of slow riding time to the fact of heavy forks that had taken out all my momentum and power. Bingo. I found what I hoped to be the perfect forks. I got home, went straight to the shed and assembled my bike. Put on the new forks. They looked awesome. I went for a ride and felt as if I had cut a huge weight off the back of my bike. I was cruising. I got to the end of my ride feeling amazing because I knew I had done it faster than I had before I had the new forks. I looked at my time and it was back to where I was before I had the month-long break. I felt so good. I was more determined than ever. Over the next few months, although I still wasn't keeping up with what I wanted for my training program, I was doing rides between 40 and 50 kilometers and feeling very confident in my fitness. But I still didn't know if it would be enough. Overall, I think I learned a lot from my training. I knew that being out in nature for an extended period of time, even if only an hour, made me feel so good, like I was flying. I just didn't know why. Even when I was training consistently, I would find myself down in an anxious state quite often. I didn't understand it. I've always been this way, but I've never put the attention into myself to try to find out why. Maybe it's because I have too high expectations for myself. Or maybe I just think about what could happen in the future too much. But whatever it is, I needed to figure it out. As a centerpiece of my project, I planned a multi-day bikepacking tour. The aim was to travel from Melrose past Wilpena Pound and return, a total of 600 kilometers over 7 days, on mostly dirt roads, to address my question, how being physically active in nature is good for your health. A week before the ride, I found out that my brother Jake, who was going to be our backup support based in Melrose, couldn't be around that week. If anything were to happen, our plan was to call Jake and he would be able to pick us up. But now, it was all on us. Even if something broke, we would have to find help and get back to Melrose where the car was. This was a real safety net, and that was gone. Coming into the ride, I had so many emotions. I was very stressed, knowing we had no backup plan. I was uncertain whether my fitness was good enough. However, I was excited for what the journey might bring. Day 1, Melrose to Warren Gorge, 90 kilometers, 5 hours and 22 minutes. I was nervous on the first day out, as I didn't know how I'd go, particularly with my level of fitness. It was mostly gentle undulating, with only 2 medium ranges that we had to ride over. The scenery was very nice. We stopped to camp at Warren Gorge. Although I had been nervous for this day, it was actually an easy ride because my legs were fresh and my energy was high. I found myself feeling very anxious when we got into camp and set up. This has been something that I've always experienced on hikes and sometimes when we camp. Because I've stopped, I just start thinking about what I have to do the next day and feel stressed. Sitting still until the next morning, I have too much time to worry. I also have this in everyday life a bit, and sometimes I can find it holding me back from doing things that I really should. This first night, I decided that this was something that I would try to work through, overcome, and understand on this trip. When I got into camp, I was talking with Dad, and he agreed that I could work through this feeling. I decided to approach this by being mindful every time this feeling came on. What was happening? What could I control? What was not in my control? What could I actively do to change the way I felt? How could being out in nature and focusing on it help me? Day 2, Warren Gorge to Hawker. 109 kilometers, 6 hours, and 12 minutes. The first morning on the trail, I woke up feeling very cold and found that my sleeping bag wasn't good enough to deal with the cold temperatures and created a couple uncomfortable sleeps. This turned out to be one of the most annoying parts of the trip. This was my favourite day of the whole trip. We started at Warren Gorge and got about 40 kilometres by 9:30, which felt amazing. This made me feel like we could just plod along for the rest of the day, and with this relaxed feeling, I found myself spending a lot more time looking around and taking in the scenery. The ride was very easy since most of the day was out of the ranges on big open plains. We went through Hawker at 5:30 and restocked with food supplies. We decided to push on and make the next day, which was going to be 117 kilometres, a little shorter. We rode along a very rough vehicle track until after sunset and found a hidden little spot in a creek to set up camp. This was the best night because I didn't get stressed since there wasn't much downtime. The feeling of riding over 100 kilometres was also unbeatable, and it was the nicest campsite as it was tucked away in a quiet spot and I felt safe. Day 3, Hawker to Wilpena Pound. 99 kilometres, 6 hours and 37 minutes. Day 3 was the lowest point of my journey. It was 25 degrees, and after the push of the day before, I found myself feeling drained. The first 30 kilometres took until 10 a.m. because it was a soft four-wheel drive track, and then we had a headwind on a section of bitumen road. We stopped at the nicest lunch spot in a large creek on the Marlana Scenic Drive. I felt stress start to overwhelm me, but while we were sitting there, we saw a kestrel hovering high in the beautiful blue sky, and I just felt calm. This relaxed me because it made me feel small in a vast world. No matter what difficulties I was undertaking, the world still moved and it was unchanged. I would be fine. We set off for Rawnsley Park. We had a tailwind on this section, which seemed good, but before long it wasn't because we had quite a bit of climbing and no breeze to cool us. It was the warmest day I'd experienced since the last summer, and I started feeling way too hot. There was no shade. Due to the conditions, I had the worst part of my ride and felt as if I was going to fail. But I dug deep and challenged myself. I made it through to Rawnsley Park and enjoyed a cold drink. Another 27 kilometres and we made it to Wilpena, where we had the most luxurious campsite of the adventure, including real toilets, showers, and a nice cafe. Day 4, 0 kilometres, 0 time in the saddle. I woke at 5 a.m. to the pitter-patter of rain on the tent. This was a very distressing realisation because the trails turned to sticky clay when wet. This meant we wouldn't be able to do the most scenic section of the trail from Wilpena Pound to Bungaroo Lookout, along the edge of Wilpena under St. Mary's Peak. This was a difficult day for me because I had no idea what the weather was going to do and whether we'll be able to finish the ride. By being still the whole day, I found myself in an anxious state once again. I had to charge my phone, so I sat at the barbecue shelter, listened to a podcast, and just watched the rain fall onto the roof, through the leaves, and onto the ground. Once again, this made me feel relaxed and in a better state of mind. Although we missed a great bit of scenery on the trail, and I struggled to be sitting still, it was a comfortable spot. Day 5, Wilpena to Hawker, 111 kilometres, 6 hours and 47 minutes. I woke the next morning to no rain, which was a huge relief. We rode from Wilpena all the way back to the northern side of Hawker, going in the opposite direction on the scenic route was very easy as it was mostly downhill. It was the most beautiful part of the ride. At the end of this day, my anxiety came back when we made camp, as we just ducked 50 metres off the side of a road and out of sight behind some bushes. At this campsite, I felt quite exposed and out of my comfort zone again. I just sat in the tent and really tried to understand why I was feeling this way. Dad explained to me why he thought it was a great safe campsite, and after a long day's riding, I gave in to my tiredness and fell asleep. Day 6, Hawker to Warren Gorge, 95 kilometres, 5 hours and 17 minutes. Once we set off, it was only 6 kilometres into Hawker, where we shared a nice cafe breakfast. This set us up for the rest of the day, where we only had a few breaks, as it was at this point in the ride where all the previous day's riding had made my fitness much better. My body was used to being on the bike all day. We stopped at Warren Gorge for the second time. This was a surreal feeling because I had now completed 90% of the ride. The last time we slept here, I had so far to go, and now I was nearly on the last day. I reflected on the journey that I had done, what I had accomplished, and it felt great. Day 7, Warren to Melrose, 90 kilometres, 5 hours. The final day, I woke up feeling odd. It was already the last day of riding. We had a very relaxed day where we just rolled through the trail back to Melrose, feeling strong in the legs. We got back to my brother Jake's house. I went into his room and got changed. It was at this moment that I was overwhelmed with emotion and teared up a bit. I felt as if I had overcome a lot and finally found myself. I had won. This was one of the most amazing things I've ever experienced, and I am so grateful that I had the opportunity. A few weeks later, I was sitting out the back of my house, looking at a tree, thinking about what I had learnt from my ride. That's when it came to me, mindfulness. Just taking the time to center myself and be aware of the world around me, just to feel the breeze and sun on your skin, just to look around and pay attention to the little things that really matter. In those moments, I felt free. The gift that I have been given from this great time out in nature was the power of being present, taking on everything as it comes, one by one, not being overly stressed about things that have happened in the past or things that might happen. I was just here now, and I felt amazing. The mindfulness I discovered through my training on the back roads of the hills and on the multi-day bikepacking tour in the Flinders Ranges gave me an understanding of how being physically active in nature is good for your health, and not just physical health, mental health too. Looking out at the scenery of nature made me feel in awe. It's not just a feeling I've felt anywhere else. A feeling where I could think about nothing, just be at peace, or I could think about everything and nature would make me feel a part of something bigger. This would ease the burden of any issues. After the ride, I realized that I'd been much more motivated to do things and happier than when I'd been out in nature. I found myself spending a lot more time paying attention to the little things around me that made me feel good, and not the big things I had no control over. Research shows that being out in nature has great calming factors and improves your physical and mental health. One suggestion is that since our ancestors evolved in wild settings and relied on the environments for survival, we have an innate drive to connect with nature. From my experience here and through my life, I think that this is very true. Over the course of the year, I felt as if I have experienced an adventure so profound to myself, and yet what I realized is all it takes is one walk around the neighborhood where there's nature and you can get the same benefits. Even though they might be smaller than if you spend a prolonged period of time out in nature, you will find a difference in the way you feel and maybe even the way you see the world. As I remember back to the third day of my ride, when I felt like I could never do it, I think of that bird soaring high through the sky. I remember how that bird made me feel so small and powerless, and yet so at peace and happy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions? Up the back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teale. It was a great talk. Actually, that's what I call a real hero's journey.
Thank you.
And it was really interesting to hear about your training and, you know, your obstacles and how you overcame them. Now, just probably towards the end of your journey, I started to think about your dad and what his preparation for the journey was like, and whether, you know, he has a kind of regime of fitness. He must be really fit.
Well, it's a great question. So basically, for the first period of my training, I was on my dad's bike, so he wasn't able to train. But then he got me off of it, so he was. And yeah, he's always done gravel riding. He's done it for like 10 years now or something, maybe around there. And he's done this ride twice before, just with mates. So yeah,
Wow.
it was all pretty natural for him.
Wonderful. All power to him is what I say. My biggest journeys are like, you know, around the block and up the road and back very quickly.
Yeah. Yes, Nick.
Well done, Teale. I think that's easily the most physically challenging project I've seen in my time here. So well done for completing that. I can imagine how difficult that would have been.
Thanks.
I just one thing you mentioned about the world is unchanged. It really struck me, and I was just wondering, how do you apply that in your daily life now? And you mentioned that you were stressed quite a lot, like every day you felt stress. I was just wondering if that has eased at all since finishing your ride.
Yeah, so I don't know, since my ride and I sort of realized like why I was feeling stressed, thinking about what was going to happen and stuff like that, I think I've been a lot more present and just focusing on what I'm doing like in the moment. And that makes me feel good. And with the world being like unchanged, it's sort of like no matter what I'm doing, the like scope of the world isn't going to change. So I can just feel comfortable that and just do my best, I guess. Yeah. Middle.
I was wondering whether you did any research around the food that you took, or what food you took, if you took dehydrated food or,
Yeah.
and whether you had to work out how many calories you needed for the ride.
Yeah. Well, so basically, most of the time when we go hiking and stuff, we just dehydrate a bunch of stuff. But because you really have to focus on like how light everything is, we brought some food with us, just some of the like more snacky things like scroggin, but we were mostly going through, every time we'd go through a town, we would stock up on what we would need for the next period of time until we were in another town. And so just kept completing that cycle. So basically, and it wasn't any like nice food or anything, it was just anything that can fuel you to get that bit of the ride done. Yeah.
That was great, Teale. And, you know, it's been a part of this journey with you. It's just been amazing to see you overcome what you have. Sleeping bag as a Christmas present? Need a new one?
That would be pretty good, yeah.
That was all.
Oh, Lyndon.
Well done.
Thanks.
Will you do another ride, or is that it?
I don't know. I've thought about it quite a bit, actually. I think I might in the future, like, because I really enjoy spending that time out there and sort of the challenge that it brings. But I think I'll do more like hiking and stuff, just because you get to spend that time out there, but it's not as difficult, I guess. Yeah. Jasper.
Very cool ride.
Thank you.
Very interesting journey. I suppose I've kind of known you since I was like playgroup, 3 years old, something like that. But like these last 5 years, I guess I kind of moved schools. I haven't talked to you guys much at all. But I found it really interesting that this year you really struggled with, or I suppose on your journey, you really struggled with being present and like mindfulness, I guess, and you like overcame that. And it's really interesting to me because I struggled with the exact same thing this year and, you know, staying present because I tend to overthink everything and get anxious about all this kind of stuff. So I'm not really sure this is a question, but like kind of like a statement. And I think that's really cool that you sort of overcame that. But actually, did you ever do any kind of like meditation sort of techniques? Because I found that like breathing techniques and all that kind of stuff really helped with my anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I didn't really do any like meditation techniques, but I found that during like up until the ride, it was sort of like the whole ride itself was like a big meditation almost. But I really found that in my training. Every time I would go on a ride, I would just like breathe out and just feel good because I was just out in it and everything else didn't really matter to me. I was just on the bike looking at my heart rate.
Yeah, that's like the exact same for me with walking. Like I'll go out and walk and I'll just chill out.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Teale, thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing something that isn't talked about enough. And I'm wondering, maybe for these people or some other students in the audience who are wondering about whether they take that plunge and do something physical or tackle something tricky to talk about, do you have any advice?
Sorry, I didn't fully catch the
All right.
question.
Talking about vulnerability, so tackling
Yes.
the tricky is one, and two, taking on a big challenge. What advice have you got?
Well, I think that tackling a big challenge, the best thing is really just to be present. You can't just overthink it too much, or you'll just get overwhelmed and not be able to do it, I guess. But I also think that you can do more than you think you can, and yeah. Yes. All right. All right. Just got a couple thank yous to do. So I'd like to give out a thank you to my mentors, Aaron and Christian. Even though they couldn't make it tonight, I'm very grateful for their knowledge and time. I'd like to thank Eleanor and Rose for helping the class throughout the year. You guys really got us through it. I'd like to thank Nick, my supervisor, for always checking up on me. I really appreciated it. I'd like to thank the class for coming on this journey with me. I'd like to thank Aaron, our guardian, for sticking with us throughout the year. Lastly, I'd like to thank my family. Jake, thank you for being such a good brother. Mum, thank you for being there for me and helping me throughout the year. And Dad, thank you for supporting me throughout this year and pushing me to do better. I'll never forget the time we shared on our ride together. Thank you. Oh, I did it. Sickos.